Welcome to this deep dive where we zero in on what matters. Today we're tackling something pretty universal, I think, workplace conflict.
It's definitely something most people run into.
Yeah, and we'll be looking at how a specific tool, the AI audio journaling app Chosen, can actually become, well, maybe a secret weapon for navigating those tricky situations.
It's true. Workplace conflict isn't just, unpleasant. It can be genuinely draining. And what's fascinating is how often our immediate reactions, our gut feelings, they kind of cloud our ability to see things clearly.
Right, or to respond effectively.
Exactly. And that's where having some kind of structured way to reflect, that can make a huge difference.
And that's really the core of our mission today, isn't it? To explore how using Chosen can provide that very structure. We want to show you how this app isn't just like a digital diary. It's potentially a powerful way to unpack your reactions to conflict.
To figure out those underlying thought patterns, the ones that might be tripping you up.
Yeah, and ultimately discover more productive ways to, move forward. We'll actually be drawing on some pretty interesting principles here.
Right, from client-centered therapy and also cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT.
To show how this all kind of fits together.
And what's particularly insightful, I think, is that Chosen, just in its design, it mirrors some fundamental aspects of these well-established therapeutic approaches.
How so?
Think about it. When you use the app, you're essentially creating this private, non-judgmental space just to explore your own experiences.
Okay, so let's dig into that a bit. Client-centered therapy, Carl Rogers, right, that keeps coming up when people talk about self-reflection.
Right.
What are the main ideas there?
Well, the brilliance of client-centered therapy, I think, lies in its deep belief in the individual's own sort of innate capacity for growth and problem solving.
Okay.
It suggests that, if you provide the right conditions, people can understand themselves and find their own way forward. The therapist's role isn't really to give advice or direct things.
More like a facilitator.
Exactly. Facilitating this process through some key principles, things like empathy, really trying to understand and value the person's experience, seeing it from their side.
Right.
Then there's unconditional positive regard, which is basically accepting the person completely without judgment, creating that safe space.
Okay, that makes sense. And the third one?
Congruence, which means the therapist being genuine, authentic, transparent in the interaction, not putting up a front.
Okay, empathy, unconditional, positive regard, congruence. Now, how does an AI app, a piece of software, embody these very human-centric principles? It's not exactly giving you a comforting nod, is it?
No, you're right. It's definitely not a human interaction.
Yeah.
But think about the actual experience of speaking freely into Chose.
Okay.
There's no immediate feedback, right?
Yeah.
No interruption, no judgment, no reaction at all to what you're saying.
True. It just records.
Exactly. So in that sense, the app provides this uniquely non-reactive listening space. By simply being there to capture your thoughts and feelings without any agenda of its own, it implicitly offers a form of, unconditional positive regard.
I hadn't thought of it quite like that. A non-judgmental digital ear.
Sort of, yeah. And the clear, predictable structure of the app, you open it, you record, you can listen back later, that contributes to that feeling of congruence. It's a reliable, safe environment for your reflections.
Okay.
And what's really fascinating is how this kind of structured non-interference can actually help you develop a deeper sense of self-acceptance over time.
So it's almost like having a completely neutral witness, just there for your inner thoughts during, say, a conflict situation.
Precisely. And think about the process in client-centered therapy. It typically involves the individual just exploring their concerns, their feelings, at their own pace.
Right. They lead the conversation.
They do. And the therapist is actively listening, maybe reflecting back key themes or feelings they hear, just mirroring, really.
To help the person gain clarity.
Exactly. Gain clarity and insight. Now, connect that to Chosen. The audio journal becomes that dedicated space for your exploration of a workplace conflict.
So I'm narrating what happened, how it made me feel, my immediate reactions, maybe even things I wish I'd said.
Exactly. And just the act of externalizing those internal thoughts and emotions, speaking them aloud, it's incredibly powerful in itself. It's like taking the swirling thoughts in your head and giving them some kind of tangible form.
Getting it out.
Getting it out. And then the opportunity to actually listen back to your own recording within Chosen, that offers a layer of perspective you just wouldn't normally have.
How so? What might you notice?
Well, you might pick up on the tone of your voice, for instance. Were you angry, hurt, defensive? You might notice the specific words you used, or maybe even the things you didn't say.
The gaps.
The gaps, exactly. All of which can reveal underlying feelings or assumptions you weren't fully conscious of in the heat of the moment. A key takeaway here is that this act of, verbalizing and then re-listening can create this crucial distance.
Right. A bit of separation from the raw emotion.
Which allows for a more objective self-assessment, potentially.
That makes perfect sense. So let's talk tangible benefits. If someone starts using Chosen regularly for this kind of self-reflection around workplace conflict, what changes might they see?
Well, several key benefits tend to emerge. Firstly, and perhaps most obviously, is increased self-awareness.
Okay.
By articulating your experiences and then hearing them back, you gain a much, much clearer understanding of your personal triggers.
Triggers, like what specifically?
Like those specific behaviors or situations at work that tend to provoke a strong reaction in you. You might realize, for example, wow, I consistently feel dismissed whenever that colleague interrupts me, or I get really anxious when faced with tight deadlines from my boss.
Okay. Identifying those patterns.
Identifying those patterns is the crucial first step, because once you know them, you can start managing your responses more effectively.
Well, that self-awareness leads to, well, what comes next? How does it change things?
It really fosters a sense of empowerment, I think. When you understand your triggers and your typical reactions, you're no longer just, solely at the mercy of your emotions in those conflict situations.
We have more control.
You begin to see that you have choices in how you respond. Reflecting on past conflicts using Chosen can help you identify moments where maybe you reacted in a way you later regretted.
We've all been there.
Oh, absolutely. And then you can consciously consider alternative approaches for similar situations in the future. This active engagement and understanding your own responses, it builds a real sense of agency. Okay, I see what happened there. Next time I could try this instead.
Right, planning a different reaction. You also mentioned emotional healing earlier. How does Chosen facilitate that? I mean, like we said, it's not offering a hug.
No, it's not. But the simple act of expressing difficult emotions, anger, frustration, disappointment, whatever it is related to work conflict, just getting it out in a private, non-judgmental space can be incredibly cathartic.
Just venting it?
Sometimes just venting it helps, yeah. Holding on to those feelings can be really emotionally taxing. Chosen provides a safe outlet. Voicing them, even without someone immediately validating you, can be a release in itself.
Okay.
And furthermore, listening back later, sometimes when the emotion isn't quite so raw, can provide that sense of detachment we talked about. It lets you process those intense feelings with a bit more distance and objectivity.
Which could help with emotional regulation over time.
Exactly. Learning to manage those peaks and troughs a bit better.
Now, you also brought up concepts from brief CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. How do those principles kind of weave into using Chosen for workplace conflict?
Right. So CBT really emphasizes this powerful connection between our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors.
Yeah.
The core idea is that it's often not the situation itself, but our interpretation of it, our thoughts about it, that significantly influences how we feel and then how we act.
The meaning we give it.
Precisely. The CBT model often looks at this sequence. Situation leads to thought, leads to feeling, leads to behavior.
Okay.
And Chosen can be a really effective tool for dissecting this sequence, especially in the context of those tricky workplace conflicts.
So let's say I have a difficult conversation with a colleague. Afterwards, I could use Chosen to not just describe what happened, but to really try and pinpoint the specific thoughts that were, racing through my head at that moment.
Exactly that. What was I thinking when they said that? And by consistently verbalizing those thoughts into Chosen, maybe over several entries related to similar situations, you might start to recognize what CBT calls automatic thoughts.
Automatic thought.
Yeah, these are like immediate, often unconscious reactions or interpretations of a situation. And sometimes they can be negative, unhelpful, or maybe even a bit irrational.
Can you give an example?
Sure.
Yeah.
Like after maybe a slightly critical comment from your manager about a report, an automatic thought might be, oh no, I'm going to get fired.
Okay.
Or they think I'm incompetent.
Right, jumping to the worst conclusion.
Exactly. Reflecting on your chosen entries over time can help you actually identify these recurring automatic thoughts. You bring them out of the unconscious and into your conscious awareness.
And once you're aware of them,
then you can start to evaluate them. Are they really true? Are they helpful? You can begin to challenge them. And that's a key step in changing your emotional response and consequently your behavior in those situations.
this really highlights the importance then of having that supportive, non-judgmental space for this kind of, well, internal examination. Even though chosen is AI, it sounds like it creates a form of safe container, right? For
Yeah.
exploring these sometimes vulnerable thoughts and feelings.
Absolutely. Yeah. In traditional therapy, the therapist consciously works to create that safe, holding environment. Chosen, simply through its private and non-reactive nature, offers a similar kind of space for self-exploration.
You can be totally unfiltered.
You can express your unfiltered thoughts and raw feelings without any fear of judgment or reprisal or consequences.
Mhm.
And as we discussed, that act of speaking and then listening back provides this unique form of witnessing your own experience.
Hearing yourself.
Hearing yourself, which can be incredibly validating and insightful in itself, even without external feedback.
Okay, let's make this really concrete for people listening. Imagine someone has let's say, a consistently frustrating experience with a micromanaging boss. They feel watched all the time, and they start using chosen after each interaction. What might that sound like, and what insights could they potentially get over time?
Okay, so they might start by just detailing the specific instances. Got another email asking for an update, even though I sent one 2 hours ago. Or they question this tiny detail in the presentation again.
Just getting the facts down.
Getting the facts down, but also how it feels. As they speak into chosen, they'd likely voice those feelings of frustration, maybe resentment, perhaps feeling infantilized or, not trusted.
Right.
Now, by regularly recording these experiences, maybe daily or a few times a week, and then listening back occasionally, they might begin to notice a pattern in their own internal responses.
Like what kind of pattern?
They might literally hear themselves repeatedly using phrases like, "He never trusts my judgment," or "I feel like I just can't do anything right for them."
Those sound like those automatic thoughts you mentioned.
Exactly. Those could be the automatic negative thoughts kicking in.
Sure.
And connecting this back to that CBT model, the boss's behavior, that's the situation, triggers the thought, "I'm not trusted, I'm incompetent," which leads to feelings, frustration, anger, maybe decreased motivation, and potentially behaviors like procrastinating on that boss's tasks or avoiding taking initiative.
Okay, so recognizing that whole cycle is the key first step.
It's the crucial first step. Recognizing it through their chosen reflections helps break its automatic nature. Then they might start to consciously challenge that thought. Okay, is it really true that he never trusts me? Or are there specific areas where he's just more hands-on? Is there any evidence that contradicts this thought?
Shifting the perspective slightly.
Exactly. It opens up space for a more nuanced view.
Okay, let's take another common one. Dealing with a colleague who maybe consistently takes credit for your work. Super frustrating. How could using chosen help there?
Right, that's a tough one. So the user might grab chosen immediately after an incident like that happens, maybe stepping away for a few minutes to record.
While it's fresh.
While it's fresh. Describe exactly what happened. We were in the meeting, I presented the idea, and then later they summarized it as if it was theirs. Detail the interaction and their immediate emotional response, that surge of anger, maybe feeling betrayed, that sense of injustice.
Getting it all out.
Capturing the authenticity of the experience, yeah. Then, when they listen back later, maybe that evening or the next day, they might not only re-experience some of those emotions, but also potentially gain a more objective perspective on their own reaction.
What might they notice listening back?
They might identify patterns in how they typically respond to this particular colleague. Perhaps they realize, wow, every time this happens, I just shut down. Or I avoid confronting them directly afterwards.
Seeing their own behavioral pattern.
Exactly. And interestingly, by reflecting in that private, safe space of chosen, they might even start to consider the colleague's potential motivations. Not to excuse the behavior, let's be clear.
Right, not making excuses.
No, but maybe to understand the dynamic better. Are they insecure? Are they under pressure themselves? Thinking about this, even hypothetically, can sometimes reduce the emotional charge.
Okay.
And this increased self-awareness about their own reaction, plus maybe a slightly broader understanding of the situation, could empower them to choose a different response next time.
Like what?
Like maybe choosing a more assertive and effective response in a future interaction, rather than just reacting emotionally in the moment or shutting down completely. Perhaps calmly addressing it directly, but privately later on.
Planning a strategy, almost.
In a way, yes. Informed by self-reflection.
And what about those more subtle workplace tensions? The misunderstandings that create friction but maybe aren't full-blown conflicts, like passive-aggressive emails or crossed wires on a project.
Yeah, Chosen can be surprisingly effective for those situations too. Imagine a miscommunication happens on a project, maybe expectations weren't clear, and it leads to some, slightly barbed or passive-aggressive emails being exchanged.
Ugh, yes, that feeling.
Right. So the user could use Chosen to just detail their interpretation of those emails. When they wrote this, I felt like they were implying that. Talk about their emotional response, maybe feeling slighted, misunderstood, maybe even a bit defensive.
And their own part in it.
Yes. Importantly, exploring their own role in the miscommunication too. Did I explain my point clearly enough initially? By speaking this all aloud and then reflecting on the recording,
They might see it differently.
they might start to see the situation from different angles. They might consider alternative interpretations of the other person's emails that they just hadn't thought of in the heat of the moment when they felt attacked or defensive.
Like maybe they were just stressed about the deadline and it came across wrong.
Exactly. Or maybe English isn't their first language and the phrasing was just awkward. This reflective process can really foster empathy, even if you still feel the other person was partly wrong. It creates a more nuanced understanding.
And that could lead to...
Potentially, it could lead to a more constructive approach to actually resolving the misunderstanding, like maybe initiating a quick, direct, clarifying conversation. Hey, can we chat about those emails for a sec?
Right.
Rather than just letting the tension fester or firing back another passive-aggressive reply.
Breaking the cycle.
Breaking the cycle.
So it really, really sounds like Chosen offers this unique and frankly valuable way to just step back from the immediate, often overwhelming emotionality of workplace conflict and gain some much-needed clarity.
Exactly. It provides this structured, yet still very flexible framework for self-reflection. And it